Welcome back to the TowerCast podcast, the towering podcast for the towering filmmaker of El Paso in the world. We have a very special episode right now. Before I introduce the amazing guest we have today, I want to mention that we're live from Las Cruces at the Las Cruces International Film Festival. We have a great setup here. I mean, they've taken care of us. Shout out to Ross Marks, director of the festival. He's amazing. And he's setting us up here for the TowerCast. So shout out to Las Cruces and their festival and all the amazing things you guys are doing.
Appreciate it.
I got to introduce my fellow co-host, Mr. John Eric Castro right here.
How you guys doing? I'm the actor's perspective, and I'm so excited to, interview one of the best directors over here.
Absolutely, Mr. Michael DeLao.
Hello, everyone.
We can't forget the lovely people behind the camera. We have Mr. Austin Young, making sure we're looking okay back there, and Mr. Ricky Rodriguez, making sure we're sounding okay back there. So thank you guys for having us. Last but not least, I have to introduce our amazing guest today. We have one of the animation, you want to say pioneer, you want to say powerhouse for what he's offered to this craft as storytelling. We have Mr. Rob Minkoff, who's done amazing works like the Lion King animated film for Disney, Stuart Little, many more. And we're gonna jump in so he could tell us about some of the amazing projects he's done and how he can inspire you filmmakers. Rob, thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So let's take it back a little bit. We're storytellers. Tell us a little bit about how your storytelling journey began.
Well, so when I was a kid, obviously I loved watching movies, and watching television. Probably too much. Like everybody, exactly. So, I was in love with it really, really early, and I remember making short films when I was a kid. One of the first things I had to do was a school project, and I did a stop motion animation short.
For your first one?
For my first one. And we would do other things. I remember it was probably I have two older brothers, and they'd learned some tricks that you could do with a camera to
would
make.
Would it be like Super 8 or would it be more?
Super 8, yeah. So what they learned is how what we called to pixelate. I'm not even sure if that term is used anymore, but the idea is just to take one frame at a time.
Sure. Yeah.
And so we would go outside, and then one of the first films we did was, we had a couple of us, I think even my sister was involved, and we were pretending to drive a car. So we're just sitting on the ground, and and basically you'd have to move forward and then take a picture, move forward, take a picture, move forward, take a picture. Just a little bit. And then what was amazing is, when you were done with it, it took forever to do it, right?
And how
your
long
butt
was
got
the final
sore.
product? Was
Few seconds,
Right.
but still, it was so cool to just see. It was very magical, you'd see that kind of effect happening.
Just that animation process, right, of just taking
Totally.
little stills and then just building.
About how old were you, would you say?
Gosh, probably 5 or 6.
Wow.
Pretty young.
Of filmmaking.
Yeah, so that kind of fun. That was a lot of fun, and then also pretty early. My family, all the kids in the family, were all did theater. So we all acted at the Children's Theater in Palo Alto.
Were your parents artists, or that they kind of came from any of that?
Yeah. My mom was an artist. She still is. She paints and sculpts.
Okay.
She's also a singer, and my dad was a ham. He would, at the drop of a pin, he would recite poetry and do sort of comedy, and it kind of ran in the family. But we had a great theater program in Palo Alto, children's theater program, and so all of us got involved. And I think I did my first show there when I was 10.
A little bit of acting back then.
So that acting bug bit me. Yeah.
And are those films lost? Can we find them somewhere?
Oh,
have you ever released
sure
them?
They're lost. I mean. It's so funny because I never throw anything away. My wife gives me a hard time about that. I do have. I mean, I keep everything, so it's possible that I will run across it at some point, but I don't have them in hand.
Right.
But I have found incredible stuff because I just don't throw it away. And go through boxes of stuff. You're like, oh my god, I can't believe I have this.
Rob Minkoff, you know how Pixar has these the short collections
exactly,
on Blu-ray, so we need to have a Rob Minkoff short collection. I know even Criterion recently released the Scorsese short film collection. We got to do something like that for Rob Minkoff.
Yes, of course, exactly. That'd be awesome.
That's awesome. So you get the bug when you're a kid, and do you pursue it through your teen years, through high school? Is that something that kind of keeps going, or we're looking at another career
interesting.
path?
So there came a point where sort of animation part of it really got under my skin. One thing I remember doing, my dad owned an audiovisual business, so he rented TVs and you know, sound systems, and you know, when the like early technology for like projection television came in, he had that. So I remember being exposed to that, even like videotape. So, you know, commercially available videotape really happened with Betamax and VHS. And before that, you'd have reel-to-reel tape, and my dad had reel-to-reel videotape machines. So I actually remember asking him to bring them home, and I would record cartoons from television. So I did have a collection of cartoons that I recorded off the TV. So that was kind of, you know, that was some of the earliest things. But I remember going to my dad's work on like a Saturday, and you know, he was busy.
Family business, like your siblings would kind of come in and work.
Well, we were just kids at the time, and so we all would pitch in to do whatever we had to do. But I remember one time, and I was probably too young to do much actual work, so he put me over to the corner, and he had like a little, a Super 8. Almost like a moviola, like a Super 8 kind of reel-to-reel thing. And he had a couple of film reels that were cartoons. One was from Sleeping Beauty, from Disney Sleeping Beauty. Another one was Mighty Mouse. And so he showed me how to thread the machine.
Scary.
And then I started to like watch it, and it was so fascinating. Again, it was like that magical moment where you would actually crank it, and you had to do it by hand. So the speed of it, of course, would you know, shift a little bit. But you could also slow it down. You could stop it. You could sort of see how it came to life. That was, you know, left a big impression. So I think animation for me kind of took over. And at probably around the same time, maybe before that, I also started to draw. And just, you know, drawing became kind of a big thing for me.
Where did it become, I guess, where we could say, you know, people tend to think that the profession comes when you start getting paid for it, right? Ultimately. So when did it become a profession at some point?
I remember, it's a funny thing. So I met someone who lived in my neighborhood, and he had
where did you grow up?
in Palo Alto. So, which is just in the South Bay of San Francisco, near Stanford University.
The tech area now.
It is the tech area. So yes. So actually, here's a crazy small world story. So my mom's cousin moved to the Bay Area. He went to work for my dad, but they bought a house in Sunnyvale, which years later, when I read Steve Jobs' biography, I was like, God, that address looks familiar. And I called my cousins and I said, does this address? They're like, yeah, that was our house.
Oh my word.
Wow.
So they lived there, and apparently Steve Jobs came to the house knocking on the door going, he wanted to come and visit and just to see what it was like. So so Palo Alto, obviously that was during the boom of the tech industry, but it was very early because I was there, you know, growing up in the 70s. So those guys were like in their 20s, doing like, you know, it was called the homebrew computer, blah, blah, whatever. I can't remember the name, but that was like the computer club.
I mean, all the way up to now, right? Because even Facebook, that's where it kind of had its inception.
But I think it was because Palo Alto had taken on this aura of kind of,
tech
you know,
startup
thing. And so Mark Zuckerberg, who I think was at Harvard, decided to move it to Palo Alto to kind of get a little bit of that, you know, Steve Jobs magic.
So you have this kind of you knew somebody who gave you a job in
So it was a neighbor, and he had an idea for a cartoon, like a political cartoon, or an idea for a cartoon, and he knew I drew, and he asked me to do it, and it was like a big struggle to figure out how much I would charge him. And I remember talking to my parents about it.
It was your first.
It was my first, and I was like, how much? And they were encouraging me to like not be shy and like not undervalue my work.
You didn't want to just do it just to do it
For the
in case they didn't like it, or was that did it?
Well,
did
he
it ever cross your
offered.
mind?
It was kind of a weird thing. I don't think I would have asked for money, but
Exactly.
he offered.
But he offered.
He was like, "This is not. Yeah, this is for paying." It was like, "I want you to do it, but I want to pay you."
It happens.
So I was like, "Okay." Pardon?
No, because it happens where you.
Yeah. So I was a little uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to charge him too much for
I think
it.
everybody goes through that,
Yeah,
right?
because
It's
because I don't think of myself as a professional, or like I'm not.
Especially at that age.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I talked to my parents about it, and I think it was they were, you know, I think my mom particularly was like, don't sell yourself short. And you know, so I think I charged them what seemed like a fortune. I was like, oh my God.
You feel
Honestly,
like in your was this in
no,
your
I
college
think
years?
no. I was probably in high school.
Oh, okay,
maybe
okay,
younger.
okay. You felt like you were living off of it for.
If I would guess, I mean, I think I charged them like It was at least $100, and it might have been $150, and it seemed like literally like a fortune.
For you, it was
Insane
like
amounts.
An insane amount of money, $150. Yeah.
Right. So that's high school. That's kind of where you feel like, man, this is my first paycheck for my art. This is an amazing feeling. Is that where you started thinking, well, maybe I should go to school for this, or maybe I should pursue?
That was very interesting. So very specifically, so when I was in my teenage years, I did a lot of theater, as I said, and I auditioned for a production of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
Ironically, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the first Disney animated feature, and it was also the first production that was ever done at the Palo Alto Children's Theater in the same year as
As a film?
the Disney film. So in
Wow.
1937, they did a production of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs at the Children's Theater as the inaugural production. And I got in that show, and I met a guy who was also in the show, and this guy's name is Kirk Wise. And we discovered that we both liked to draw.
Okay.
And so we became friends over drawing, and he brought a couple of books in that he owned that he showed me about how to draw. One was about Tex Avery, who was a very well-known animation director of short films. And so we became really good friends. And then in high school, I might have been in high school, so then he was the one who came to me and said that there's a school called Cal Arts, which teaches animation, which was founded by Walt Disney. Right. And then we made an animated film together in high school that I used first because he was a year behind me. I used as my portfolio, then he used it the next year. We both got into Cal Arts 1 year apart. Then I got hired at Disney after my third year. He got hired at Disney at least a year or maybe two later.
As animators?
Well, we were in the animation department, starting at kind of like the low level, in-betweener. Anyway, long story short, Kirk Wise is the co-director of the movie Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
We have Lion King, we have Beauty and the Beast, and these two films are part of what we know as the Disney Renaissance.
Yeah.
The 90s kind of films that brought the Renaissance to animation. Wow, that's amazing.
It's
both of you, that's
crazy,
awesome.
So, I think the big question everybody wants to know, how did Lion King kind of like spark up? Like, how did you get behind that project?
So what happened was there was a guy who was running development at Disney named Charlie Fink, and Charlie originally pitched it to Michael Eisner, who was running the studio, and he said, what about doing a movie like Bambi, but with lions in Africa?
That was the pitch.
I think it was Bambi in Africa. And Michael Eisner says, it would be great if you could figure out how the lions won't eat Bambi.
Well, and this was and forget my Disney geekness, but this was Eisner was also responsible for revamping the parks and the Animal Kingdom kind of portion of things. So I'm sure those kind of maybe went hand in hand a little bit. I know that when we go to Animal Kingdom, my wife and I love going to Disney. The biggest thing you see there, the centerpiece is the Lion King.
Right.
Ultimately, so that must have had something go hand in hand.
I mean, it was stages sort of development. So that was kind of the initial phase. There was Disney Animation goes through a development process. So they have a development team. The first writer was Linda Wolverton, who had written Beauty and the Beast. Oh, wow. So she was hired to write Lion King. Before it was called Lion King, it was actually called King of the Jungle.
King of the Jungle.
And everybody would say, is that Tarzan?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like,
So she wrote the first draft. They hired Tim Rice to write the lyrics. Tim Rice had been brought in to
Broadway legend.
Yes, he was working with Alan Menken finishing Aladdin because Howard Ashman passed away. So Tim was brought in to do Lion King, and they said, Tim, who do you want to work with? He said, what about Elton John? And they said, oh yeah, maybe if he'll agree to do it. So Elton John signed up, and then it kind of started that way. Then
you came later in the process.
I came at that point in the process. So my first day was April 1st, 1992. Wow. And what happened was I was given the script to read. I read the script, and it was very different than the movie that we ended up making. And I came into my first meeting. They had actually already done about 5 minutes of story reel on the movie. And it was the whole movie was structurally different. So for instance, Timon and Pumbaa were childhood friends of Simba and Nala. Oh, wow. And there was a scene where they all go to the water hole together and they're playing, and I watched this. Rafiki was a completely different character where he was very serious, and he was early in the movie, in the first scene, talking to Mufasa, saying, you know, what's going on with Scar, but a very serious character. Robert Guillaume, who is the actor who played the role, made sense because that was kind of his persona, a very serious guy. So I came into that meeting that first day and I was like, how much of the movie, because there was dissatisfaction. Company was not satisfied with how the movie was at that point, which is not, it was very normal. All the movies sort of go through that kind of process and that kind of development. So I didn't know. So the producer, Don Hahn, was there. Roger Allers, who was my directing partner, who had been on the film, was there. And so we got together and I said, how much of this, because I'd read the script too, and I was like, it need to work. Sure. And I said, how much do we have to keep? And Don said,
oh, that's a tough one.
Nothing.
Wow.
He really just
The freedom.
So we can start over. So we said, okay, we need to kind of figure out a little bit what the movie is, like what's the, and the thing that inspired us mostly, I think, for what the movie became was Star Wars and Joseph Campbell. So that had, you know, was such a huge impact in my life, and I think everybody who ever saw that, you know,
Absolutely.
seen them, but that first movie was so special. And there was something, again, about the hero's journey that felt like that's what we needed to do with this character, and it was missing a lot of humor, it was missing a lot of fantasy elements. So the magical elements, for instance, Mufasa's ghost coming back, that was not in the original script, right?
Wow.
So there was Simba never left Pride Rock.
Wow.
So that whole thing about Simba going out into, and then meeting Timon and Pumbaa as the outcast, that was all invented in that second iteration of the movie. Wow. We said, let's kind of do something more interesting with Rafiki instead of being a sort of serious elder statesman, as I think the way they described him. We said, what if he's more of a shaman witch doctor? You know, much more kind of, you know, mysterious and kind of, and we were worried when we were like, is Robert Guillaume going to be able to do this? Because he was just not known for that. Sure. And Don Hahn said, you know, he's an actor, right? He's an actor, and see what you can get out of him. And he said, let's go and do a session, and if he doesn't come through, you know, we can think about maybe getting a different actor.
Did he knock it out in the first session?
Well, we were in that first session and we were going through it, and we had a completely different approach to the character, new scenes, new pages and everything. And it was really, at the beginning, it was very low key and very like no energy. And there was one moment I remember, I was like, Robert, when you, just before you do this line, can you laugh? Just have like just a great laugh, just like a cackle, like just, and he did it, and it was like amazing. And then suddenly his whole character was changed. It just changed his characters because we kept trying to make him
to kind of trigger everything else, right?
It was just that laugh, and then literally every time we would do a session and he would slightly fall into that thing, we'd say, could you laugh? Could you just try laughing before you do that line? Get it back in the character.
I have to ask, did that at that time at Disney Animation, since there was so much bubbling up at the time, was it that type of atmosphere? And I would only assume that you're able to kind of walk in on some of the other productions down the hall or down on the next stage. Was it collaborative in that sense that now we're able to develop the script around the characters, or because you would think that with Disney, it's this established company, the script is set, the picture's set, we're just here to hire talent. But it sounds like your process was much more collaborative, much more intuitive in that regard.
It was, you know, very often the movie would go through a development process that would end up in a screenplay that was not ready for production. It would sort of be like, it had maybe the basic elements, but there was a lot of room for, or a need to kind of add layers. But because of the process of animation, I think that the studio was comfortable with the notion that it would go through this kind of development process on the boards. So the storyboard artists, and that was actually one of the things that defined the difference between animation storyboard artists and live action storyboard artists, where a live action board artist is really called on to look at the screenplay and kind of illustrate a camera angle, right? To really draw. So live action board artists tend to be a bit more technically proficient, whereas animation board artists are much more cartoonists, thinking about the character, thinking about the movement, the performance, the acting, quite often the dialogue. So if you had a scene and like it was missing something, you know, you could rewrite the lines in the storyboard process, and the studio got comfortable with that notion. Normally, it's a very political thing where once it's set, it then goes to the next step in the process.
Assembly line type
But Disney Animation was famous for having that kind of laboratory environment where you would figure it out on the board. So a lot of
that was a Walt Disney thing. That was just his essence. And let's play with this, and let's bring the animators, and what are we going to do with this, and how much fun can we really have with this as well, right?
Now, one of the things actually I learned, because we thought that Disney Animation was always just done on the boards, and actually what I found out when I started working there was during Walt Disney's time, he would have an office with a writer and a storyboard artist in the same room. And they would work at a partner desk. So actually they had from both sides of the desk. Sure. So the writer could write the scenes, but the storyboard artist could influence it too, so that it was a real collaborative.
We see little iterations of that, I know, in Walt Before Mickey, which was a kind of biopic that they made, as well as Saving Mr. Banks, and Tom Hanks kind of playing the Walt Disney character, working with the composer, but at the same time the storyboard artist, and at the same time.
Because I feel like, there's a lot more limitation, right, when you're using like a regular camera and just positioning, like, I guess the logistics of what you can play with, and in animation there's so much more freedom, right? That just you can kind of explore the space a little bit, and I guess that's how it's done.
Wherever you want, there's no limitations.
Yeah, and again, it's a visual medium, and so the artists who were really the storytellers, the artists were really the ones who were telling the story visually, and they nearly invented the craft of animation and how to do that. So it was just kind of a different kind of place. It had a different,
that's very
production
interesting.
line.
And a big question I have towards that, since you know animation to the T as far as drawing, you grew up drawing. Was there a visual, as filmmakers, we tend to, as director anyways, I'd love to see a shot, and more times than not, I'll be on set and I see a shot and I say, this is a shot, this is what the film is. And that allows my cinematographer to say, hey, this is a shot, this is what we need to surround the film around almost, and collaborative with the actors. In your sense, was there a storyboard that you saw, for instance, the first storyboard of Pride Rock, or the first, impactful pictures are like when, when Simba, we see the high angle, when angle of Simba and Mufasa, like that falling into the death kind of. So did any of that impact you, or was there a shot that you thought, this is it, this is what the film has to be?
It's interesting you said. So the scene of Mufasa's ghost coming back was a kind of defining moment for the film.
Sure, yeah.
And when we did it, because there was always a hierarchy, you'd have to, you'd approve it as the director, but then you'd show it to the studio, basically. Right. And the studio could have their chance to give you notes, criticism, suggestions, whatever. And there were even, at least 2 stops on that road before sort of getting a final approval. And those were always tricky moments because,
So you couldn't get too attached to one because
they're tricky moments because you never know what there's no way to anticipate what happens, and sometimes those meetings go incredibly well, sometimes they don't go well, sometimes, and again, it's all conceptual until it's finished.
Sure.
And so everyone has an opinion and a point of view, and everybody has a theory about what works and doesn't work. Yeah. But as the director, you feel an ownership.
Sure.
And the studio actually, I remember the guy who kind of managed Disney Animation, his name is Peter Schneider, made this point, because you'd go through a meeting with his boss, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Jeffrey would always be very direct and shoot from the hip.
Sure.
And sometimes you would agree, sometimes you wouldn't.
Right.
And you're like, what do you do if you don't, how do you handle this? This can be very political. How do we handle it if we think that maybe he's made a suggestion that's not going to work?
Right.
And so we talked to Peter about it, and Peter said, you can never do it because somebody told you to do it. You have to do it if you believe in it. So your job is to listen and to try to understand where the note is coming from, because he has a valid point of view, and maybe he's seeing something that you're not seeing, or he's seeing something that needs to be improved.
Absolutely.
Maybe the solution he has isn't the right one for the movie, but that's not the one you should do. You need to think about this. You need to come up with the correct, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, it's not his fault. That's what he said. At the end of the day, this has to work, and it's your responsibility. So if it doesn't work, you can't blame him. You can't say, well, that was what he said to do.
That's interesting. And Jeff Katzenberg went on to do DreamWorks and stuff with Spielberg and Shrek and a bunch of things that were successful, but he obviously had a stint in Disney that
Yes,
he had a voice.
He was absolutely, and one of the things that's very interesting. One of the things I think that made him so effective was he was a rule breaker,
Sure.
and was fearless when it came to pushing the boundaries of what was okay. You know, we had a movie where we had the death of a main character, which is not a normal thing to do.
That is very true.
And you know, he was convicted and convinced that that was the right thing to do in the movie. I actually remember. It's funny. I met with Jon Favreau when he was starting to do the remake. When he was starting to do the remake, and he said to me, he said, if this movie was made today, you would not be allowed to kill Mufasa after 40 minutes. It's like you can kill a main character in the first. Well, yeah, you kill him in the first reel, right? You kill him, in the prologue or whatever, and then the movie goes on.
Yeah.
But to actually invest that much into that character, and then he dies, it's just so unusual. So, and I would say that was really a thing that Jeffrey was fearless when it came to breaking rules or trying things that hadn't been done before.
As a young storyteller, did you say, I'm going to put my foot on the gas and run with this,
Yes.
or were you cautious?
No. I was pushing it. No. So when it came to, we had a storyboard of Simba finds Mufasa's body, and then goes up to Mufasa and then tugs on his ear, and it was all in close up.
Yeah.
And there were people in the studio that said, you can't do that. I'm like, why not? And they go, well, because it's just too uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And this should be staged at a distance, and it should be in silhouette. And I was like, no. This is such an incredibly powerful thing. Actually, one of the things that inspired me was, before I got on the movie, I saw a documentary called Lions and Hyenas, Eternal Enemies. And I saw this documentary, and it was so powerful because they went out there for, I think, 7 years and filmed these lions and hyenas in their natural habitat. And it was just incredible footage, and it's so gripping and so emotional, because it's a life and death struggle out there. When they say it's a jungle out there, they're not kidding. But I remember it having such a big impact on me that I thought, if Lion King had just a small measure of the power of this real documentary, that it would be an incredible thing. So I was always pushing, even in the Stampede. So those were actually, so Roger and I directed the movie together, but what we did was we divided up the movie so that we said we would work together as partners on the story development.
Right.
And then when it came to directing the sequences, each of us would take sequences so that way we could be have a unique voice and make decisions, because it's sometimes not functional.
Exactly.
Partnering is great if you see eye to eye all the time, which we worked very well together. But in the story process, it was a little easier because we could have it out. We could argue and discuss. But when it's in production,
the ink is flowing,
you don't. And the worst thing actually is, you don't want to show the crew this kind of. It's very confusing to the crew to hear multiple voices.
Yeah, sure.
You need an anchor.
Right. So we said, there are a couple different ways you can set it up, and we decided, let's just divide the movie in sequences. He'll take certain sequences, I'll take certain sequences, and those becomes our. That didn't mean we didn't sit in the editing room and make comments, but it was on his sequence. It was me commenting and suggesting. My sequences, it was him commenting and suggesting, but I could decide, or he could decide.
That's terrific. I mean, well, ultimately, for instance, just because you touched on the Stampede scene, that as a kid was significantly impactful to me, at least. I remember that. As well as kind of the villainous aspect that we didn't really see a ton of with Scar and the hyenas, ultimately, right? So that was a major deal. I also think that as far as the ghost, as you say, the ghost scene of Mufasa, we also see that in live action now. I remember specifically when I watched Black Panther, and his father. He sees his father again, kind of in the afterlife. That was, I think, a page taken right out of Lion King, in terms of the style, the aesthetics, and the tone of the scene as well. I thought that was taken directly from it. So I think it's still inspiring filmmakers now in the Disney realm as well, as you say, with Jon Favreau.
And who came up with the iconic?
You mean the lifting up Simba?
Yeah. Was that you or him?
That was my sequence.
Okay.
You take credit for
the
that.
Pride Rock sequence.
It's so hard. It's very difficult.
Here.
It's very difficult ultimately to say
this is my idea.
Who, I mean,
Right,
especially you're working with a team of people, so the storyboard artist, you know,
maybe
it
somebody
could.
drew something that you were
I
like,
mean, honestly, I don't remember. It could have come in the script. It could have come in the storyboard artist. Could have come in a story meeting.
But it wasn't like that. You know, the ghost part where it just kind of stood out. It was just kind of
something that may have already been established.
I mean, again, that kind of thing is. I mean, you know, I would say where that idea came from. There was a great TV series called Roots.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And you remember that? And so he holds up the baby.
Wow.
You know, Kunta Kinte.
Yes.
And that was, I remember seeing that when I was a kid. And so that left an impression. But I think that raising up of the child was kind of it. That's what it was. Yeah.
Well, just to tie a little bow around Lion King, because we'd love for you to get into your other works as well and tell us a little bit about the future. But just to tie a little bow on it, what was the release of that film like? I'm really curious because we see, and by the way, for those who don't know as much about animation, just take a look at the credits for any animated film, and you'll see that you have cinematography for lighting, you have cinematography for shape, you have cinematography for shadow, you have cinematography for, as well as, the co-directing makes complete sense because even on the sequence basis, you're working with hundreds of artists to make your vision come true. So just keep that in mind. Obviously from conception to production to wrapping it up and letting the world see it. What was that like? What was that experience like for you?
How many times did you see it? Did you sit on it and see it till you felt comfortable, you know, to...
You mean like the finished film?
Yeah, to let, you know, the producers...
The thing is that when you do an animated movie, it's a strange experience because for the most of the time, there is no movie. I mean, when you do a live action movie, you build a set. You have your actors.
That's true.
You go out, you shoot. You've got dailies. It's finished. In animation, you have the storyboards, then you have the layout, then you have the rough animation, then you have and then you have the finished animation, and the last thing you see is the composite where everything now has been rendered and looks finished. Yeah. It's the very last step in the process. So the whole time, it's really in your mind. Right. It's really conceptual.
You have to trust that the final product is going to be, provided you're taking the right steps, is going to be exactly what you want.
So it's an incredible process to see it because it comes together slowly. And you know, you see like the first time you have one scene in color, you're like, wow, it's like a milestone. Then you see a full sequence or a scene in color, and then wow, that's a milestone. And then you see, you know, more of the movie coming together and all the pieces. And you know, that the movie just becomes so much better to watch because you're watching roughs and animation dailies, and it's very hard to watch. Right. There was a famous screening of Roger Rabbit when they first did a test screening, and they had done rough drawn animation for all the Roger Rabbit characters. It was so hard to watch that the test screening, the whole audience walked out before it was finished. Wow. And it was a disaster screening.
Did you guys have to test Lion King various times, or
we did? Of course. So we first of all, you would do screenings for the studio, just like the staff, the animation staff, and you screen early versions, maybe like a sequence or two sequences, and then you see. And you know, you get feedback from people, and animators are the most critical people that you will ever meet in your life. Sure. They are, you know, nothing. They've seen it all.
Exactly.
Nothing is impressive. Right. Everything is like, I don't know about that. You know, that's kind of cheesy.
What I think is interesting too is this is coming connectively with Pixar getting their thing started as well. I mean, Toy Story was '95, so. This is Disney's shaping kind of both things, right?
Actually, there's a fun story. So, a couple of guys from Pixar. So, Joe Ranft, Pete Docter, and Andrew Stanton came to LA and sat in and basically helped pitch comedy stuff for the song Hakuna Matata.
Oh wow! Pete Docter, by the way, runs Pixar now.
Yes, and then this was kind of a great Easter egg in Toy Story. At the end, last sequence, when the mom is driving away, they're listening to Hakuna Matata on the radio.
Wow,
that's amazing.
So they came in and helped, and then there was another meeting that I got invited to with a bunch of people from Disney Animation, where they showed a story reel of Pixar when it was just story reel. And the whole Pizza Planet scene wasn't in the movie. And at that round table, they came up with the idea of the aliens. It was actually, Gary Trousdale, who co-directed Beauty and the Beast, and Chris Sanders, who was a story artist who did How to Train Your Dragon.
Oh wow.
Kirk Wise was there. It was his idea, I think, to do the whack-a-mole, the whack-a-alien. So there was like this great session, but the whole thing about the claw came out of that
round
meeting,
table.
so they didn't have that in the original version of the movie.
So you were all on the same lot to a certain degree, and just kind of going back.
But John started his career at Disney. My first day, first week at Disney, actually,
and this is John Lasseter.
Was John Lasseter's last week.
Oh wow!
So I met
Disney.
John. I actually met John at his going away party.
Oh my word!
Wow.
In and out.
In and out. So I was like, "Where's John going?" He's going to the Bay Area. That's where I'm from. I'm like, "He's going to the Bay Area. What's he doing there?" He's going to work at Pixar. What's Pixar?
And then Steve Jobs and George Lucas.
I mean, I knew what Pixar was, because it was like, the computer animation.
Right. But it's interesting that these things are bubbling up, and as creatives, you both were it's really I think of it of like the film school brats, where the Coppolas and the Scorseses were all pitching ideas to each other. I mean, animation had that moment as well.
Yeah. CalArts was kind of a foundry for that. So Brad Bird went there, John Musker went there, John Lasseter went there. Tons of Henry Selick was there.
I gotta ask, were you in the popular classroom, the A11?
Oh, A113.
Is that your thing? So that, if you don't know, Pixar has that number in every single film.
Yeah, it's a little Easter egg.
But it was
I think Brad Bird started.
Yeah.
I think it was in
Incredibles?
Family Dog.
Oh, okay.
Which I did some animation on.
Oh wow! So you guys, did you meet any of them in college, or was it?
I met Brad. So Brad was working with Jerry Reese, and they were up in the Bay Area, working on a movie based on The Spirit, which is a comic book by Will Eisner, and they were going to do it as an animated movie. And when I started working at No. It's called The Spirit is a kind of a film noir 1940s detective, which ultimately got made as a live action film.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But they were going to do it animated, and they had all this incredible animation by Glenn Keane and John Musker animated on it. And so there was this story going on that they were going to put together this team of animators, and were people willing to leave Disney? And this was before Michael Eisner came in.
Okay.
So Disney was very, very sleepy, kind of on the brink of extinction. It was on the brink of extinction. So there was like Brad Bird and Jerry Reese are going to do this thing, and it's going to be amazing, and who wants to go? And I was definitely one of the people who was like, that sounds exciting.
Wow.
So I got introduced, and I went up to the Bay Area because I'm from there, and I went up there and met Brad and Jerry, and it was before Family Dog. They showed me actually some footage that they had done of Tim Burton's design. So this was even before Tim Burton. He was at CalArts too, and so Tim Burton had done all the designs for Family Dog before Tim's career took off.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, because we have filmmaking friends from El Paso and the New Mexico area, and we tend to have that relationship with other artists, and it's amazing to think one day hopefully one of us is gonna make it and have these stories to go back and say, I met that guy at Utah. I met him in college, and we did this and we did that, and that's how it went.
And after the success of Lion King, how did you jump? Like I'm pretty sure you had a lot of scripts thrown your way after the success of Lion King that you chose Stuart Little. Yeah, how did you end up on that one?
Well,
and then a different type.
So
not Disney.
Not Disney. So I'd read a version of the script which was written by Caroline Thompson, who wrote Edward Scissorhands, and that was not the version. Then then I read another version that was written by M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh my word!
Really?
You're one of your heroes.
Before The Sixth Sense. Before The Sixth Sense.
And how did you like it, or was?
No, that was It was. There was something very special about the writing. First of all, it's based on
I'm kidding.
I see mice. I see talking mice.
No, I can use that for another one.
So I met him.
Really?
Oh yeah, because I'd read the script, and then of course it was like a director meeting with the writer, and I gave notes, and then we had a follow-up meeting, and he was like, "I can't do these notes." I'm like, "Why not?" Because I just got hired to direct a movie based on my script called The Sixth Sense.
Oh my word!
Like, what's that?
Oh, so he just couldn't.
So yeah, he left the project.
Did he get the story credit, or did you win with another version?
He got writing credit.
He got writing credit.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
it's written by M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh my!
We had other people come in, of course, but
he got top billing.
Of course.
Of course. Off the success of The Sixth Sense, I'm assuming as well, right? That's amazing. But it was, I mean, I remember Stuart Little being something I watched and rewatched when I was a kid. It was very compelling. The animation was revolutionary in the sense that that's where the 3D animation kind of started coming from, kind of that era. So how did that, how was that? That was directorial choice.
It was, I mean, it was very challenging.
Sure.
First of all, the biggest challenge for me was I was directing my first live action feature. I'd done some live action shorts, so I understood a little bit, but you know, there's a massive difference in the way you think about production.
Were you catching up to the technology, or was the technology catching up to you? Was it that type
no,
of
the technology was very, very early. So so Sony ImageWorks did the animation of Stuart, and they had done the movie Anaconda. That was all that they'd done. So they'd hired Ken Ralston to come in to kind of lead their thing, and Ken had done everything. You know, he worked at Lucasfilm forever.
Oh, okay.
So we had top guys, and then we ended up with John Dykstra, who was another legend in the VFX world, and John came and worked on Stuart Little. So
did you have to take a page out of Roger Rabbit in a sense, or was that?
Yes, I mean that was. So we actually our video assist guy did Roger Rabbit.
Oh wow!
And so for me, a big part of it was I had to go on the set and start shooting. Now the first thing I wanted to do was storyboard everything, because that's would be normal for animation.
Yeah.
And what happened was we were going through so much script development. This was after Night left.
So you just couldn't.
There was a lot of stuff that got done, and so I would storyboard stuff, and then we would rewrite it, and it would be like, and every time I was like, and I started to get nervous. I'm like, I'm not going to have time to plan this, and we hired Guillermo Navarro, who's a fantastic DP.
Sure.
And so Guillermo.
Why does he sound familiar? He's done
a gazillion everything.
Quite a few things. Yeah.
Guillermo's done everything. Yeah. So Guillermo came in, and I was like, Guillermo, like this is so, I'm not used to this. And he's like, don't worry, it's fine. You'll get through it. I'm like, well, how do we do this? And I'm like, he's like, it's okay. We take the script page and we show up on the set and we meet the actors and we have them read it and rehearse it, and then we figure out what the blocking is, and then we decide where the cameras angles are going to be, and then we shoot it, and that's how you do it. I'm like, really?
How much simpler. Well, that's a big question I have to ask. And in that case, was the choice to make Stuart Little, was it I want to jump into the live action realm, or was it I want to push animation forward? Or was it both?
It was probably more I want to jump in live action.
Okay.
So I'd had that idea to do live action years before Stuart Little came along.
Okay.
And I actually was developing a number of different live action movies, one with Bob Zemeckis.
Oh, wow. Which?
Never got made.
Okay.
And so I was doing that, you know, and then I actually was going to direct Into the Woods. That was something I was working on.
That's amazing.
In a very early version, and I had to call Meryl Streep, I remember, to ask her if she would be willing to play the witch. This was years before it actually got made.
Right.
But it was at Columbia, which is where Stuart Little was, so I had spent, you know, the better part of a year working on that project for Columbia, and then when Stuart Little came along, it was also Columbia, so I sort of got to know people. Did it feel like
something like that would have been, because Stuart Little, it's not a musical, so did it feel like maybe taking the musical route felt familiar, or you were just kind of like...
A bunch of reasons. I mean, musical theater sort of in my blood. It's like I've done a lot of it, and you know, Lion King was a musical, and so it felt very comfortable for me for that reason, and I was also a huge Sondheim fan, so that was a major piece. But however it goes. So we had a big meeting where we had to pitch it to the head of Columbia, and
how did that go?
Well, we sort of they decided not to make this. They decided to make Godzilla instead, basically.
Wow. Okay.
So then so the Stuart Little came along, and it was like this. It made sense. It was like there's parts of this that make sense for you to do as your kind of first thing. So what made it difficult was obviously, we couldn't do it like an animated movie. We had to do it more, you know, in the kind of traditional live action thing. But I started my first week of shooting, and I would set up shots, and I would be like, okay, I need to shoot Gina Davis. Like, set up a shot. Okay, we're going to get this close up. And then I would say, okay, action. And she would read 2 lines. I would say, cut. And she was like, what?
You're shooting for edit.
Yeah. Because I didn't know, and she's like, I can do the whole thing. I was like, no, it's okay, I don't need it.
Oh, wow.
And she was just kind of
because I know this is the close up.
And the editing bay, did that end up being?
So after a week of shooting, maybe 2 weeks, I can't remember, the head of production came to the set and said, Rob,
you can shoot the whole
you're
scene.
not shooting this correctly. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, you have to shoot coverage. I'm like, what's coverage?
Oh my God! And then
Wow.
the studio.
No, they freaked out. They were having, and we were in production. We're shooting. It's costing $100,000 a day or something. I don't even know what. So, and then they're like, you have to learn how to do this
Conventional.
now. So I was like, oh, like there's a whole other thing.
Did you feel like Bob Zemeckis or Back to the Future, where he was like, we shot 3 weeks with this one actor, and now we have to reshoot the entire thing almost, pretty much.
Yeah.
Just going back to like basics. Okay.
Yeah.
What's
And the
coverage
other really, really hard thing was that Stuart Little never showed up to set. So the actors had to act with nothing.
around
Exactly.
Right?
now they'll use model. Yeah, I was going to say now they
We
use
had a little
models.
model, of course. We had a little model.
And then you just kind of frame it for that.
You frame it for that, but then you're like, but then when you cut the movie together, we had a director's cut, of course, right?
Yeah.
Right.
No animation, no Stuart Little, just Michael J. Fox's voice, and it was like, and it was terrible. It was like, oh my God, this is
'cause you see
because
little
like the
boat
actor
going
that's
around.
like the star of the movie doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist, yeah.
So there's no energy. There's no life. There's no anything.
That's-
so
And that's
it
the
was
gamble, right?
it was rough.
The gamble's just kind of thinking, okay, let's hope everything comes together
The
well during
acting's
production,
there,
so then that way when we're animating, it'll find its way, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I was again used to that process where you would
Right.
see everything like partly finished and not really finished,
Bit
but
by
it
bit.
was tough.
So
That's
the trajectory of Lion King and Stuart Little kind of pushing you further in your career, and now did you feel, I've experienced both to a certain degree. I love animation, love live action. What did you feel after that? Did you feel this next choice is going to be
Or did you
crucial?
want to
Well,
take
it
a
was-
different route? Let me see my.
Or did you- or did you honestly
the last thing
think-
I really wanted
yeah.
to do was a sequel to Stuart
Right,
Little.
right.
Exactly.
And then they sort of came back to me and were like, "You have to do this." And, they were very generous. So I was like, "Oh man, do I want someone else to do it?" And
Sure.
then, but I was able actually to shoot Stuart Little
Mhm.
very differently than the first movie because
okay.
I actually got to plan things
Right.
and
This
got
time
to
around, yeah.
storyboard them.
Okay.
And if you look at the filmmaking, it's way better in the sequel.
In the sequel.
It's way better. It's remarkably better. And just in terms of like how we use the camera, because in the first movie
It was coverage.
we were like it was covered,
It was
but it was
coverage.
also like we had Stuart was here. The big thing is that in the second movie it was like I need to know how Stuart can move around
So
because
I can
if you're showing up on a set with a bunch of actors and you don't know where Stuart's going to be, how do you choreograph Stuart? Like,
Right.
where do
Yeah.
you put him, and how do you make sure everybody's looking at him? So it's just like
Exactly.
such a headache. You're like, okay, just look. Stuart will just stand there.
You
Like, he's
know,
not
so
doing
now-
anything.
Like a laser, like you just
But by the way, that's what's interesting is that when you're doing any kind of movie, there were some things that I did on the first movie that were actually pretty good. One of the things was we had a scene with the cats. We had a scene with Monty, played by Steve Zahn, and we had Snowbell, played by Nathan Lane.
Right.
And it was Monty comes over and discovers Stuart, and Snowbell is terrified because he doesn't want anyone to know that he's got a mouse living in his house
Right.
because it's embarrassing to him because he's a cat. So there's this whole thing, and I remember talking to the animal trainers because there was nothing written for the scene, and again we had to show up and figure this out. And actually, Ed Stone, who's out here, worked on this with me. So so what I did was basically choreograph the cats, and it was like we're gonna have, and it's quite complex. So we have the cats, but we have them doing a bunch of different moves that really create complex choreography for the cats
through puppeteers,
which
or
allows you
through
just animal trainers.
Just animal trainers.
So it's like, can we get the cats to do this and this and this, and then
Wow.
can we get the cat to do this, and this is the
That's
time
my word.
because there's this whole thing where Snowbell's trying to block Monty from seeing Stuart, and then he sees him, and there's a lot of little things going on.
Pieces.
But that's the thing is that it doesn't matter how much movement, every little movement is very meaningful.
Sure.
Exactly.
So that's really from animation, you know, that just like, you know, a character stepping forward into the frame or stepping back into the frame, or all those little adjustments in the stage picture help to convey the meaning of the scene or the dynamic in the scene or the who's in power and who's not in power.
Right, absolutely.
So there's an emotional component. It's very complex. So we really took that to another level on the next movie to really think about how are we going to choreograph this.
That's
in a way
interesting,
not gonna
and especially
comparable.
the first. You know, what you tend to tell first-time directors or anybody in this industry, don't work with children, don't work with animals, and you did both
did both
at the
in one.
same
I'm a
time.
glutton for punishment.
Clearly.
No, it's
That's
true.
interesting.
It's a very interesting thing. Actually, if you look at my career, it's bizarrely eclectic.
Yeah.
It's like I've done, animated features. I've done a traditional animated feature. I've done a CGI animated feature.
Yeah.
I've done a live action movie. I've done a combination live action animation movie. I've sort of done a little bit. I did a martial arts movie.
Right.
I've sort of done a little bit of
out of that filmography. I mean, and trust me, we could go on and on and on.
Exactly.
But is there a picture you feel, just like your films are like your kids, right? You don't pick a favorite necessarily, but something that really made an impact on you, whether it was recent or back when your career was kind of getting started. Which one do you feel like solidified you as a storyteller?
That could be a two-parter. Which one, like back then? Which one caught you in this nowadays? Which
more
one's,
recently?
Yeah,
which,
more recent. Maybe a two-parter question there. Which one was your first one, and nowadays, which one's the one that? Oh wow.
There is a right answer.
No, I don't know. It's a weird thing because for me it's always the next one.
Sure.
It's like that's really
Okay.
where
as it should be, I think.
It
should be. I think as filmmakers, we never want to feel like we got there.
The thing is, I don't know if you feel this way, but the process of making films is, it's an incredibly joyful thing. It can also be incredibly painful.
Absolutely.
And, you're trying to do something, and it, somehow, just for me, I always feel like I fall short. Like it's not as good as I wanted it to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, or I could have done this, or I could have done that, because I do a lot of that sort of like, I missed this opportunity. Why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
We
You
could
feel
have done
like
this.
on the next one, I learned my lesson. This is what I'm going to do.
So it's the next one. You have a chance to like do it again and
Sure.
and do something better or more interesting, or try something that you haven't done before. So for me, the excitement, and it's always usually the most fun on time on a movie is literally the moment you get an idea. That's the most exciting time,
that's a
right? Like, well, you sort of go, oh, wouldn't it be cool if?
Yeah.
And then it's a long road to actually turn that if into a
I do that
reality.
to him a lot as my DP. Imagine if we did this, and then he has to. Okay, how do we? Let's get the camera. Let's get the paint.
And you struggle, and then you're like, now you're sweating.
Now we got it. Yeah.
But if
the
you're
idea.
talking about, the idea, so it's like when you're sitting in the story room going, oh, wouldn't it be great? Or like you solve a story problem. That, to me, actually, that's the thing I'm most interested in.
The writing part. Do you feel like the writing story development part?
The story development part is the most interesting thing because, again, you're trying to it's like you're trying to unlock the mystery of the whatever it is you're trying to do. Like you're trying to figure it out.
Beautiful.
And when like something's not working, and you're trying to figure out why is it not working, and how do I?
We're problem solvers
Yeah.
after all,
Yeah.
right? Especially on the set, whether it's a story or when you're in production, and especially in post, we're problem solvers. We have to really get that.
Yes.
Turn that switch on at all times.
And if you've done it right, what's interesting is that, like, you could have what seems to be an unsolvable problem, and then it's that one thing that you do that then suddenly unlocks all these other things. You're like, everything starts to make sense.
Yeah.
It's like, I do that, I do this, this is all going to work.
It's like a Chinese puzzle. Just that you finally find the curve on it, and here it is.
So last big question. For anybody who wants to get into animation, or I guess get into storytelling and all that, what's your advice to people who are coming up in this?
Well, I had great teachers, when I was going to college. I mean, I had great teachers throughout my whole life, but doing what you love is the key, right?
Sure.
But it's difficult. It's challenging because if you really love it, then suddenly if you're going to try to make money from it, it changes it in a very essential way, and you don't want to lose what you love about it, even though it can be difficult and painful and gut-wrenching work, and it's like there can be so many frustrations along the way. So you sort of have to be prepared to face all of that. And if you don't have the stomach, did you see? Oh my God! I watched this documentary.
Yeah.
Which
just come to mind. I just watched it 2 days ago with my son. It's kind of crazy because my son's uncle said, "Oh, you should watch this. It's amazing." It was called The Alpinist. Did you see Free Solo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is
insane.
Oh wait, no, this is Free Solo on steroids. This is
Oh my God,
another
my
guy.
hand's already sweating.
This is about another guy who didn't just climb mountains. He climbed alpine mountains that were covered in snow and ice. Oh my God. And I can't tell you how it ends. It's devastating. He was unbelievable, but he
loved it.
He loved it, and he went for it, and
he was prepared for the risks. He was prepared for the.
Yes. But just watch it. So it's very inspiring, but it's also very sobering.
But that's definitely what you'd give a storyteller. Say, be prepared for what's to come, but never lose the love for it. Ultimately.
Exactly. So you just have to keep that flame burning. It's a sacred flame that you have to keep lit, and sometimes it goes out or it comes like very close to going out.
Speaking of Disney animation, it's like the Encanto film, right? We got to keep that candle kind of protected, and then kind of that type of thing. Can we look forward to anything, Rob?
Yes.
Coming up?
Yes, I just finished a new animated movie.
Blazing, or what was it?
Yes. Well, the title is it depends. It's AKA, also known as. So it was Blazing Samurai for a long time because it was based on Blazing Saddles, which is the Mel Brooks movie, and Mel Brooks is in the movie, our movie. He's also a producer. But we've gone through a bit of a title change, which will be announced very soon.
Yeah, we saw just some of the early marketing
now
stuff.
Now it's the Saddles Blazing, right? There we go.
So, but that's going to be coming out in theaters July 22nd this summer.
Okay.
Exciting.
So
Awesome.
working title, Blazing Samurai.
The title now is Paws of Fury.
Paws of Fury. So we need to be on the lookout for Paws of Fury.
AKA Blazing Samurai.
AKA Blazing Samurai. That's amazing that you have Mel Brooks as were you able to collaborate with him?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes. Actually, this is the third movie I've done with him.
You have to. We have to get him on the podcast as well. You gotta get us in there. But that's fantastic. I mean, look out for this film. I'm sure it's gonna be not only hilarious because of the foundation of it all, but also we know that Mr. Rob Minkoff is amazing in animation and knows exactly what he's doing with this forum and how to tell stories. Any plans after that? Maybe.
Well, I'm working on a few new things, but
nothing that we can be discussed. Awesome. Wow. I think that about wraps it up for this episode of the TowerCast with the amazing Rob Minkoff. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for inspiring us filmmakers. So stay tuned. We're going to be hanging out at the Las Cruces International Film Festival. We're going to talk to a lot more amazing people, some of which Rob actually mentioned, which are waiting for us outside. So we'll get them in here. But thank you so much, Rob, again. And stay tuned. Thank you.